Hello everyone, my name is Jazz Austin and I'm a conservationist, and I'm here today to tell you why I think you're a conservationist too. What does that mean? What is a conservationist? Do you have to have gone to university? Do you have to be a scientist, a campaigner, or a park ranger? To be honest, I didn't really know, so I looked it up in the dictionary. A conservationist is defined as a person who advocates or acts for the protection and preservation of the environment and wildlife. It's not specific about the means or the scale, but it unites a whole global community of people who want to make a difference for wildlife. My curiosity in the natural world came far later into my life than some of my peers. I grew up in South Devon, a place surrounded by Dartmoor and the sea. These places felt like they had never changed and could never change, and I'd never really thought much further about it than that. But then I went to university, and I had a growing realization that all was not right, that our global systems, in a business-as-usual state, were slowly and blindly destroying the natural world. It felt urgent, and at times paralyzing, but it wasn't timely or unique. For decades, many people have felt the same, and also didn't know what to do. And it was at that moment that I decided, I didn't really know how, but I really wanted to try and make a difference. Whatever pivotal moment in human civilization, globally, more than ever, people are really waking up to the environmental crises that we're seeing. And actually, they want to do something about it. But often, they don't know where their skills are best lied to try and make a difference. So that's why I'm here today. I'm going to share with you some of the skills and in the roundabout way that I've come into conservation of how I think you can make a difference. But first of all, I want to share with you some of the amazing wildlife that we've got here in Wales. Because we're so lucky here. So this here is the shrill carder. The shrill carder has a very distinctive high-pitched buzz, and it's actually one of the rarest bumblebees in the UK. So we have 25 bumblebee species, and this is one of the rarest. It's only really found in South Wales and scattered across other parts of England, but it is really rare. We actually found one in Rumney up in Cardiff last year. We have bottlenose dolphins, so you might not know, but in Cardigan Bay there is the UK's largest resident population of bottlenose dolphins. They're fantastic mammals and they have amazing memories. A bottlenose dolphin can actually remember the unique whistle of other dolphins for up to 20 years, and I think it overtook the elephant in the longest memory test. Gannets. So on Grasshome Island, we have 40,000 pairs of gannets, which live on the island. And some of you may have seen how gannets dive into the water to catch their prey. They actually can dive from up to 100 feet into the water and reach speeds of up to 60 miles per hour as they're doing so. So they have little air sacs in their faces which help protect them when they hit the water. I just think that's really cool. It's like airbags in your face. And many people might not know, but Wales is actually home to a temperate rainforest. So these are rainforests that are unique to our mild and wet climate, that have a huge diversity of wildlife, from trees, mosses, lichens and ferns. Really beautiful places, quite a lot in mid Wales, and the sessile oak is one of the kind of main species there. And our swifts. So every year, swifts make a fantastic, huge journey from Africa each year to Europe to breed. It's 6,000 miles they migrate, and often they'll spend 3 years going back and forth before they'll actually find somewhere they want to nest. I just find swifts absolutely fascinating. We have hundreds of nest sites in Cardiff, where actually Ely is one of the biggest hotspots for nesting swifts. So these are just some of the examples that I've chosen to share with you today. But why not take a moment now to think about a species that you love or a landscape you love, and maybe use that as a conversation starter for people after the break. So I've had a roundabout way of getting into conservation, and sometimes find it quite hard describing this to people. So I thought I'd try and share this with you today, because I found along the way there's lots of different ways that different industries can get involved in helping solve the environmental crisis that we're in. So originally, I did an undergraduate degree in architecture at Cambridge University. I liked art and maths, and so it seemed like a sensible decision, and I didn't really think much more of it. But when I went, I had a growing realization that our impact from the built environment and modern systems were having a huge impact on our wildlife and natural world. I became fascinated by the concepts of biomimicry and the circular economy. Biomimicry is a term to say inspired by nature, so design inspired by nature. And circular economy is basically a concept which means that waste is no longer in a system. So it's a whole train of thought where you can have products and buildings that produce no waste. Obviously, there's no waste in nature. And I'm going to take this example of the Caledonian Forest, where I've spent some time volunteering. Caledonian Forest still exists in fragments in Scotland, but it used to cover most of the country. And in this forest, everything regenerates. So some of these trees here are old Scots pines trees, which live for hundreds of years. And whilst they grow, they support Scottish crossbills and red squirrels and wood ants, which make huge 1 metre high nests out of their the needles which fall. It's such a magical place, I would recommend going. But when this tree dies, it decomposes into the ground, and all of the energy, all of the nutrients end up going back into the soils and the ecosystem. There's no waste created, and everything then starts again. These concepts of circular economy and not creating waste are not only relevant to the architecture and the built environment, and this is something I was really thinking about a lot when I was at university. It's relevant to every product ever made, every city ever built, every single business that was created. How are the materials made? How are they manufactured? How did they get there? What type of energy was used to create it? And what happens when it's finished with? Does everything end up in landfill? Or can we move to a system where the materials used are recycled and regenerated, and actually we're using renewable energy to create these things? This is something that we can all be thinking about in our everyday lives, at home and at work. So after university, I was a bit confused. I had a drive and enthusiasm to make a difference, but I didn't think I wanted to be an architect. I did like problem solving though, and so I was lucky to be offered a job in a startup as a project manager for an online crowdfunding platform. I didn't really think that this new world of technology, data and computers would be hugely relevant to the environmental causes I felt driven to solve, but I thought it would be useful to get some experience and I could do some other things in my spare time. However, I was very wrong. I started to get involved in hackathons. For anyone who's not heard of a hackathon are multi-day events where groups of people from all different disciplines get together to try and solve a problem, or multiple problems. I found quite a few that were involving environmental issues, and I have to say, my initial thoughts of working in the technology industry were completely turned on their head. I was surrounded by people working in technology, design, marketing, all scientists, all sorts of people that were gathered together to try and solve a problem. It didn't matter that their background wasn't necessarily in science, or they weren't an expert in one of our projects was about red squirrels. It didn't matter they weren't an expert in red squirrels, but it was having a unique take on the problem and also having skills that you wouldn't have if you were a scientist or a red squirrel expert, perhaps, to help try and solve some of these problems. And for me, that really made me realize how every single one of us has skills and expertise and influence that you can use in many different ways that might not be the traditional way of thinking about wildlife conservation. Some of these were looking at tracking invasive species or protecting our oceans. And although this was just a small subset of people, it really did make me realize how we've all got something to bring. So then on to my master's. After a few years in technology, I realized it was time for me to go and really learn about bees. So I moved to Cornwall and studied pollinators. Really magical time, but what it really drew to me was a real fascination for pollinators and how they kind of support our global systems. So pollinators are absolutely vital for food production, the survival of wild crops, and also an essential part of the food chain. Since the Second World War alone, the UK has lost 97% of its wildflower meadows, which is a vital food source and habitat for our pollinators and other creatures. However, our private gardens actually present a huge opportunity to turn this around. Our private gardens in the UK account for an area 1/5 the size of Wales, which I think is quite a staggering area. And 87% of us have access to some kind of outdoor space. There is so much we can do for wildlife in our own private gardens, from making things a bit messy, renaming the weeds as wildflowers, keeping more kind of dead wood. So a lot of insects and bugs like to kind of, they decompose the wood, and by doing this you'll support a huge variety of beetles and bugs, which are really important for attracting our birds to our gardens. But also creating something like a small pond or wetland area. Water is vital for almost the life cycle of almost every single animal or creature that you might want to find in your garden. And even connectivity. So our urban green spaces are largely quite disconnected from each other. We've got huge fences and walls, but actually there's lots of things you can do, like creating a hedgehog highway where you might cut a small hole in your fence to make sure that species can wander through your gardens without necessarily letting your pets into your neighbour's garden. So maybe take a moment now to just think about, if you've got an outdoor space, what could you do? It might just be a patio, or you might have a windowsill, or maybe you've got a whole garden. But what things could you do to make a difference? Often these things don't involve spending money. They might often just involve having less tidy gardens. And you'll be surprised at what comes in. So what about now? So now after my master's, I got a job as a project manager for the RSPB, and I manage a partnership project called the Giving Nature a Home in Cardiff project. This project aims to connect communities, families, and children all across Cardiff with wildlife. It was born out of a study which found that only 1 in 8 children have a reasonable connection with nature in Wales, which I think is just quite a shocking statistic. The work we do involves outreach, so going to schools, events, and running community events with people who want to improve their urban green spaces. But it stems from a more overarching problem. And that is largely summed up by this quote from David Attenborough. No one will protect what they don't care about, and no one will care about what they've never experienced. Our whole issue with wildlife conservation, climate change, biodiversity loss, it's not going to get any easier if people don't care. And we know that the main thing to get people to care is to experience nature. By 2050, we know that 2/3 of people are expected to live in urban areas. And so this problem isn't going to go away. How do we want people to care if they've never experienced wildlife? This is something that we can all do something about. Just being curious about our local green spaces. What parks around the corner that you haven't been to yet? Do we have public rights of way that you haven't yet explored? The Wales Coast Path is a fantastic, huge path going all the way around our coastline, accessible for quite a lot of people. And if you can take it one step further, starting to learn about those species, the plants and animals that you encounter on your way, and maybe even sharing this with others. Because fundamentally, if we don't address the disconnection with nature issue, it's going to make everything else a whole lot harder. So here in Cardiff, we also have a huge amount of wildlife on our doorstep. So the River Taff, which is only a few metres from us today, we actually have otters that live on the river, and kingfishers. And it's not rare to see the kingfishers actually just on this stretch by the stadium. And we also have peregrine falcons that sometimes nest on City Hall. These are the world's fastest bird, and they live right here in the city with us. There's so much more wildlife that lives in Cardiff, through our amazing parks and even down at the bay and along our rivers. So it's worth just having a little time, taking a time to explore. So finally, what do we need to do? We know we need to protect our existing wild spaces and species, but we also need to fundamentally change our systems. The way we're going to do this is by questioning the things that we're buying, the things that we're doing in our workplaces, the impact we're having. But I think most importantly, it's about using our networks, our own expertise, and realizing our own influence to help change this. I think everyone today can have a think about what you're good at, who you know, what difference you can make, and maybe just start a little train of thought of where that could go. And as a leaving thought, as we're going into spring, maybe do try and get outdoors into your local area and find out something about nature that you didn't know, and maybe share it with someone close to you. You are a conservationist. Thank you.